Welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to Gaming. You're in space, you're the captain of a small spacecraft, and you're on the way back to Earth after a long time out in some far distant galaxy. Your sole need is to get your crew safely home, in one piece, no matter what the cost. However, sometimes that need is, let's say, overridden by a desire you have, an unrequited lust that you have for the science officer. An unfortunately cold and frigid woman whose attentions are mostly focused on an object in her possession. A canister containing an alien embryo, the fruits of your labours out in space. Her brother is the security officer on board the ship, an aggressive man with sole access to a very important location on the ship, the weapons locker. He harbours a great deal of distrust for the fourth member of our crew, the ship's computer. The ship's computer that was designed by the captain and has a sole need, an objective, as it were, a primary objective, which is keep the ship safe. Very loose, woolly need, that one. Keep the ship safe. Now what you see there with the basic playset that I've outlined through improvisation is that things could go well in this plot, but more likely than not things will go badly, and that is what Fiasco is all about. But to give you maybe a better sense of things, let's ground it more firmly in reality. Suburbia. Player 1 is playing a teacher, a quiet man, much well respected throughout the community, happily married, or so he thinks. He harbours a dark secret. In his desk drawer at the school, so at work, under lock and key, is an original copy of Mein Kampf, his most treasured possession. Now, while he may feel he's happily married, his wife feels otherwise. She also has a need, and that is to get out of Suburbia. She wants to run away, and she is engaged in an extramarital affair with the local gardener, so maybe she wishes to run away with him. The local gardener is a simple man of simple means and simple needs. But he does have access to a very important location in the region, a fertilizer treatment plant, an excellent place to dispose of a body should the game go in that direction. Now, from a long-dead marriage, the gardener has a son, and the son is the pupil at the teacher's school, is one of the many pupils, and this son, coming from a working-class background in middle-class suburbia, has been bullied relentlessly. He also has a need, and that need is that he has something to prove. He wants to turn suburbia upside down. Now, how's he going to do that? Well, all of that will unfold during the course of the Fiasco. Fiasco, a role-playing game, storytelling game by Pulpit Games. It's an interesting hybrid, is Fiasco. You could compare it to the extraordinary adventures of Baron Munchausen, but it's a bit more structured than that, in that it is dependent on all of the players, pretty much pulling in opposite directions. The game is hugely inspired by the works of the Coen brothers and other such movies. It cites a great deal of them in the book, such as Fargo, Blood Simple, Barton Fink, Bad Santa being another one. Essentially, it focuses on films where there's an excellent plan executed badly, or a piss-poor plan executed to perfection. And the way the game goes in Fiasco is effectively you have between 3 to 5 players, never more than 5. If you have 6, you're split into 2 groups of 3, because it becomes too unwieldy. And you pick a playset. So let's say we pick our spacecraft playset. And then you pick relationships between characters. You do that by each rolling 4d6 into a central pool, 2 white, 2 black each. And let's say we have 4 players. Player 1, who decides his character is the captain of the ship, picks one of the numbers that corresponds to one of the subheadings under relationships in this playset. And let's say this subheading is romance, and then he picks another one that corresponds to one of the 6 options under romance, which is unrequited lust. He therefore has the relationship of unrequited lust with the player's character to his right, who will be the science officer for the sake of argument. Now, You do this with relationships, and then you do it again with whatever you choose out of needs, locations, and objects. And it's often best to go with 2 needs, 1 location, and 1 object. After all, it is a collaborative game, and if every single character had a need and there were no objects or locations to base them around, it might be quite a difficult scenario to pull off. I'm sure it wouldn't be impossible. Once you've done that, you will roll your dice into the central pool again and you start playing the game. And the way you do this is player 1 will, let's say, establish the first scene. He will say that the captain is on the flight deck and he reports something, and so on and so forth. Let's say the scene will go along the lines of: the captain has stood on the flight deck and he's monitoring the life signs of his crew. Everything looks good, and he expects to get the ship back home in a matter of days if they continue travelling at their current speed. As he's monitoring the life signs of the ship's crew, he decides he will flick through some of the camera feeds just to check the crew's quarters, just to check everything's all right. He stops at the quarters of the science officer, the woman for whom he has much unrequited lust, and he watches her undress on the camera. Now, that's establishing the scene, at which point the other players have to resolve the scene. Now, they can resolve it in a positive or a negative way. If they decide to resolve it in a positive way, the player gets a white die to then give to someone else, but we'll get onto that later. If it's resolved in a negative way, he's given a black die to give to someone else. So the players may say, well, a positive outcome we think would be that he gets away with it, he gets his rocks off whilst watching the science officer undress. A negative outcome might be that maybe he sees another member of the crew walking into the room with the science officer. Maybe she spots the camera turning to look at her. It could be anything like that. And once you go through around the table, and you can choose, you can either establish scenes, or you can let the other players establish a scene for you that you choose the resolution of. So you choose whether it's positive or negative for your character, or for things surrounding your character. You do this until half the dice pool is gone. Now, the reason you are picking up a die and then giving it to someone else is because at the time when the tilt comes along, at halfway through the game, you all roll your dice, and the person with the highest number of black, and the player with the highest number of white, get to pick the 2 tilt elements. It's essentially the thing that goes wrong, whether it's the hostages being shot in Fargo or something along those lines. Something goes catastrophically wrong. In this game, it could be the alien embryo escapes or gets stolen, or maybe the weapons locker gets raided, or maybe there's a random shooting. Maybe the ship's computer decides, no, now it is time to eliminate all of the crew. The point is, something bad has to happen. Then you have Act 2, which plays out exactly the same as the first act of the game, where you have to either establish scenes or resolve them, depending on your choice. Except this time, rather than essentially the rest of the players, if they resolve the scene, saying negative, passing you the die and you having to give it to someone else, who you want to either screw over or help, you have to keep the die you're given if you establish the scene. So what I've witnessed is a lot more people try to resolve scenes in Act 2 and establish scenes in Act 1, when it's less important, arguably, which colour dice you end up with. At the end of the game, you all roll your dice again, and essentially the net total of essentially a high number in one colour is very, very good. So if I had just had black dice at the end of the game and I got 13, my character has got off with a fantastic ending, which you then narrate in the way of a montage sequence. If, however, he got to the end of the game and he had 3 white dice and 3 black dice in front of him, and he rolls them all and ends up with a net total of about 1 in white, it means something catastrophically bad is going to happen to his character, which you also have to narrate through montage. It isn't a game where you're trying to win, and it definitely isn't a game where you're trying to get your character to succeed at anything. Indeed, it's more about telling an interesting collaborative story. And just because I've thrown out the spacecraft example, you could have any setting at all for this game. If you want a fantasy island setting, go for it. If you want to go for suburbia, if you want to go for on the ice, which is the Fargo-like setting, if you want to go for DC 73 or Salem Witch Trials, which I did at the UK Games Expo. Now, you can set this game absolutely any time period, any setting, any types of characters, absolutely anything. And that is the best thing about Fiasco. Fiasco has so much freedom, so much replayability. And unlike Munchausen, where you could argue you rely too much on the player's imagination, you can go off on tangents and drivel, Fiasco is firmly grounded, because you have your relationships and you have your need object or location that will arguably always keep the story on track. Now, when I was playing this at the UK Games Expo, the first game I played in was a game where the playset was Sal's penthouse, a Saudi Arabian prince's penthouse. I had a Native American character, an eco-warrior, an arsonist, called Running Bear, who was trying to smuggle some endangered lemurs out of Sal's penthouse. We also had a Boris Chekhov, who was a White Russian, I suppose. He was a remnant of the Tsarist regime and thoroughly up himself, and the owner of a quickly melting nude ice sculpture. We also had a freakish arsonist pyromaniac, psychopath, criminal woman, and we had a character that went to public school with Boris Chekhov, or private school rather, with Boris Chekhov, and was determined to actually steal the insurance deeds to his erotic ice sculpture. It all sounds very chaotic, very shambolic, but the thing is, the plot worked perfectly. We did another one shortly afterwards set in Salem Witch Trials, we did another one the following day set in suburbia, and that somehow, by the montage at the end, was involving Vogons, and half a head Bob. One of the characters essentially got his head cleaved in half halfway through the game with a chainsaw. Is that cleaving? I'm not sure. But anyway, I will recap those better in my actual Fiasco recap video. What I'm trying to get at is that this game has such freedom to it. All you need is, for yourself, 4d6, 2 black, 2 white. If you're a responsible GM or player, you might have a large set of these in case the rest of your players don't. Aside from that, all you need are some flashcards and some pens. If you don't have flashcards, use post-it notes. If you don't have post-it notes, just use paper that you've torn up. And that will allow you to put the notes between each of your characters for relationships, needs, objects, locations, etc. There's not much more to say about Fiasco, except it's a very reasonably priced game, and the Bully Pulpit website does actually allow you to download playsets for free. So if you are struggling to come up with one yourself, and by all means you can do, there are a great number of playsets on the website that you can just download, along with a play mat that narrates the rules in simple fashion and has a pool for your dice to go into. It's just a wonderful game. It's a wonderfully simple game, but it appeals so much to the role player in myself because you can just go absolutely anywhere with it, and you can make it chaotic and comedic, or you can make it serious and soul-shattering. My character in the Salem Witch Trials playset ended up with his ears being cut off, I think, and his ears and hands cut off due to his consorting with witches and spreading false rumours around town, or they were classed as false rumours. And another character ended up being eaten to death by a zombie. How did that come about? That's the thing, the game can go anywhere. But it's something I very much recommend. And in fact, so does Will Wheaton. He speaks on the back of the book, and he says Fiasco was one of the greatest storytelling RPGs I've ever played. I highly recommend it. Well, Will, I agree with you. Fiasco is one of the finest storytelling role-playing games ever played. Don't be put off by the fact that there's no real structure, there's no GM. Just rely on your imagination and your ability to tell a good story, and that of the rest of your players, and I guarantee you will have great fun. You will have such good fun with this game. Thank you very much for watching.